You know, it's pretty wild how Sweden went from being this super welcoming country to having some of the toughest immigration laws in Europe. Let me tell you how they got there. So, back in the day, Sweden was like this poster child for the perfect welfare state. Great healthcare, top-notch schools, equality all around, you name it. But then, things started to change. Fast forward to a few years ago, and suddenly Sweden's dealing with a massive influx of immigrants. We're talking about 20% of the population being foreign-born. That's a lot for a country of just 10.6 million people. Now, don't get me wrong, Sweden tried to make it work. They really did. But they hit a wall. The system just couldn't keep up. Schools were bursting at the seams, hospitals were overcrowded, and there wasn't enough housing to go around. And then there's the crime issue. I mean, Sweden went from being this peaceful haven to having the highest rate of gang-related killings in Europe. Can you believe that? They're even second in the world for bombings among countries not at war. It's crazy. So, what did Sweden do? They got serious. Really serious. They looked at the situation and said, okay, this isn't working. We need to change things up. First off, they tightened up their asylum laws. No more of this come one, come all business. They started doing thorough checks to prevent people from abusing the system. They cracked down on illegal immigration, too. But here's where it gets interesting. They set up these special reception centers for asylum seekers. The idea is, you come to Sweden seeking asylum, you stay in one of these centers while your application is processed. You don't just get to settle wherever you want anymore. And if your application gets denied, well, they've got these return centers to help you get back to your home country now. I know what you're thinking. That sounds pretty harsh. And yeah, it sparked a lot of debate in Sweden. Some folks are all for it, saying it's about time they got tough. Others are worried it goes against Sweden's values. But here's the thing. It's working. The number of asylum seekers has dropped significantly. The Sweden Democrats, you know, that right-wing party that used to be on the fringes, they've played a big role in all this. They've been pushing for stricter immigration policies for years. And now, they're the second largest party in parliament. It's like they tapped into this growing concern about integration and crime, and it resonated with a lot of people. So that's how Sweden solved its migration crisis. They basically did a 180 on their immigration policy. Is it perfect? No way. Is it controversial? You bet. But it's definitely changed things. The big question now is whether this tough stance will actually save Sweden in the long run, and if other European countries might follow suit. It's a complex issue, no doubt about it. But one thing's for sure, Sweden's story shows just how quickly things can change when it comes to immigration policy. It's got people all over Europe talking, that's for sure. Now let's talk about how this whole thing went down. It wasn't like Sweden woke up one day and decided to change everything. Nah, it was more of a slow burn that suddenly caught fire. See, back in 2015, Sweden had this massive influx of asylum seekers. We're talking about 160,000 people in 1 year. That's almost double their previous record from way back in '92. Can you imagine trying to handle that many people? It was chaos. They were turning gyms, churches, even setting up tent camps to house everyone. The costs were through the roof. So by the fall of 2015, the Swedish government was like, okay, we gotta do something. They started making changes. Faster processing for asylum requests, stricter rules for those who got rejected. And they came up with this idea for the reception centers. But here's the kicker, they put their money where their mouth was. In their 2024 budget, they set aside a whopping 13.8 billion Swedish kroner for this new migration policy. That's about $150 billion, folks. A lot of that cash was earmarked for expanding detention capacity and helping rejected asylum seekers get back to their home countries. Now, let's talk about these new policies for a sec. They introduced these identity checks for anyone coming in from Denmark. It was a big deal because it basically marked the end of Sweden's open door policy. They also started matching their asylum laws with EU rules and cut back on some of the benefits they used to offer. It was like Sweden was saying, hey, we're going to be more like our neighbors now. But here's where it gets really interesting. Remember those Sweden Democrats I mentioned earlier? They've been riding this wave of discontent. They're not just talking about immigration anymore. They're tapping into all these worries people have about integration, crime, the economy, you name it. And it's working for them. In the last election, they snagged 20.5% of the vote. That's huge, and they're not afraid to ruffle some feathers. They've done some pretty controversial stuff, like putting up posters in Stockholm and handing out leaflets in Greece to discourage refugees from coming to Sweden. Love them or hate them, you gotta admit they've changed the conversation in Sweden. So where does this leave Sweden now? Well, it's complicated. On one hand, yeah, they've managed to reduce the number of asylum seekers. The system isn't as overwhelmed as it was before, but on the other hand, they're dealing with some serious issues. Those vulnerable areas they talk about? Some people call them no-go zones. It's gotten so bad that first responders need police escorts and flak jackets to go into some neighborhoods. That's not exactly the Sweden people think of when they hear model welfare state. And let's not forget about the social impact. Sweden's always prided itself on being this open, tolerant society. Now they're having to grapple with questions about national identity, integration, and what it means to be Swedish. It's heavy stuff. So, did Sweden really solve its migration crisis? I guess it depends on how you look at it. They've definitely changed course, that's for sure. But whether this new direction will lead them to calmer waters or just different storms, well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One thing's for certain, though, the rest of Europe is watching closely. Because if Sweden, of all places, can make such a dramatic shift, who knows what could happen elsewhere? All right, let's dive a bit deeper into this whole situation. You know, it's fascinating to see how this has all played out. Sweden's always been known as this progressive paradise, right? But now they're dealing with some serious growing pains. It's like they're having an identity crisis on a national scale. Let's talk about these vulnerable areas for a minute. These places, man, they're a real problem. We're not just talking about a little bit of crime here and there. In some of these neighborhoods, the local gangs are basically running the show. The police can barely operate there. And get this, they're seeing kids, like young teens, getting arrested for murder. It's heartbreaking stuff. But here's the thing. This isn't just about crime. It's about a whole system that's struggling to cope. The schools in these areas, they're overwhelmed. You've got classrooms full of kids who don't speak Swedish. Teachers who are trying their best, but just don't have the resources. And then there's the housing situation. There's just not enough to go around, so you end up with overcrowding, which only adds to the problems. Now, let's talk about the economy for a sec. Sweden's always had this great welfare system, right? But that system is under serious pressure now. You've got a lot of new arrivals who need support, who aren't able to enter the job market right away, and that's creating tension. Some Swedes are worried about job security, about competition from low-wage labor. It's adding fuel to the fire of this whole debate. And that's where the Sweden Democrats come in. They've tapped into all these anxieties and frustrations. They're saying, look, we told you this would happen. We need to put Sweden first. And for a lot of people, that message is resonating. It's not just about immigration anymore. It's about this feeling that the Sweden they knew is slipping away. But here's the million-dollar question. Is Sweden's tough new stance actually going to fix these problems? Sure, they've managed to reduce the number of asylum seekers. But what about all the people who are already there? How do you integrate them? How do you tackle the crime problem? How do you make sure everyone feels like they're part of Swedish society? These are tough questions, and there are no easy answers. Some people argue that Sweden's new policies are too harsh, that they're abandoning their humanitarian values. Others say it's about time, that Sweden needs to look out for its own interests. And you know what? Both sides have a point. It's a classic case of being caught between a rock and a hard place. Sweden wants to help people in need, but they also need to make sure their own system doesn't collapse under the pressure. So where does Sweden go from here? That's the big question. They're trying to walk this tightrope between being humanitarian and being practical. They're pouring money into integration programs, into education, into job training. But will it be enough? And how long will it take to see results? One thing's for sure. The Sweden of today is very different from the Sweden of just a few years ago. It's a country in transition, trying to figure out its place in a changing world, and the rest of Europe is watching closely. Because in many ways, Sweden's story is Europe's story. It's about how you balance openness with security, diversity with national identity, compassion with pragmatism. It's a tough balancing act, no doubt about it. But hey, if any country can figure it out, maybe it's Sweden. They've always been innovators, right? Who knows, maybe they'll find a way to make this new approach work. Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be an interesting ride. Well, folks, that's the story of how Sweden's been dealing with its migration crisis. Pretty wild ride, huh? From open borders to some of the strictest policies in Europe, Sweden's journey shows just how complex and challenging these issues can be. But hey, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to explore about immigration, integration, and how countries are adapting to our changing world. If you found this interesting and want to dive deeper into these kinds of topics, why not hit that subscribe button? I'm always cooking up new videos that break down complex global issues like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. So go ahead, smash that subscribe button and ring that notification bell. That way, you'll be the first to know when I drop new content. And hey, if you've got thoughts on Sweden's approach or ideas for future video topics, drop them in the comments below. I love hearing from you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay curious, folks.